I have to admit, when I first pulled up the source for today's deep dive, I actually thought there was a mistake.
Mistake. How so?
Like a file transfer error or something. Because, usually we're looking at market trends, historical biographies, maybe some cutting-edge AI papers.
And this was
Not that.
not even close. This is dense. The title alone is, it's practically a paragraph.
It is a mouthful. Sexual energy circulation, autonomic cross-coupling, and the reinterpretation of Fangzhongshu.
Right. It reads like someone smashed a medical textbook into a Taoist scroll and then, I don't know, ran it through an electrical engineering manual.
That's a pretty good summary, actually.
And this is why I love doing this.
Yeah.
Once I got past the title, I realized it's not trying to be mystical. It's surprisingly mechanical.
Yes.
It feels less like philosophy and more like an operating manual for the human nervous system.
That is the perfect way to frame it. I think the intimidation factor comes from the vocabulary, but the core idea is actually very grounded.
Okay, what is that core idea? It's basically arguing that we have a fundamental misunderstanding of how our bodies process high-intensity input.
Before we get into the mechanics of that, and I definitely want to unpack autonomic cross-coupling because that sounds like it's from a sci-fi novel, we need to talk about who this is for.
Yes.
Because the text opens with a very specific, almost aggressive disclaimer. It basically says, stop. This might not be for you.
It does. And that's a crucial distinction to make right at the top.
Why?
Because usually when we see texts about sexual energy or sexual arts, which is what Fangzhongshu means, the immediate assumption is that it's about enhancement.
Right, the Cosmotips approach,
Sure.
spice up your life, that sort of thing.
Precisely. We think it's about increasing libido or curing dysfunction or just having better sex in the conventional sense. But this source explicitly says that's not the point.
It's not trying to boost libido.
Or deny it. In fact, the author is really clear.
Yeah.
If you're young, you're active, and your desire functions as pure vitality.
Meaning you engage, you feel energized, you sleep well, wake up feeling fresh.
Then you don't need this. You can just close the book.
I found that fascinating. It's so rare to see any kind of self-help text say, hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
It implies this is a therapeutic intervention for a very specific set of symptoms. It targets an experiential shift.
What kind of shift?
It's for individuals who started to notice that desire feels less like vitality and more like exhaustion rather than enjoyment.
The phrase that jumped out at me was satisfaction followed by emptiness.
Yes, that's the key. That cycle of high intensity followed by a crash. If you feel that the cost of the experience, the depletion, the brain fog, the lethargy, is getting higher than the reward,
And this is for you.
then this framework is relevant. It's about fixing a system that's leaking energy, not one that's circulating it.
Okay, so if the problem is the leak, the exhaustion, the solution is this autonomic cross-coupling. Now, most of us have, a high school biology understanding of the nervous system.
Right. The standard binary model.
There are two modes.
You have the sympathetic nervous system, your fight or flight, stress, arousal, high alert.
And then you have the parasympathetic, the rest and digest, calm, regenerative.
Exactly.
And the rule of thumb is that they're like a seesaw, right? If one is up, the other is down.
You can't be running from a bear and digesting a cheeseburger at the same time.
Right.
And in a survival context, that's true. High sympathetic arousal usually shuts down the parasympathetic functions to conserve resources.
But this text is saying that's not the whole story.
It argues that this binary view is incomplete. It introduces cross-coupling as a third functional state.
A third state. Okay, so what does that look like? Is it just being like half stressed and half relaxed?
No, it's more specific. Think of it like a superconductor. In a normal wire, if you push a ton of voltage through it, that's your high sympathetic arousal, you get resistance.
And resistance creates heat, friction.
And eventually the wire burns out.
Right.
That's the stress response. That's the exhaustion we feel.
Got it.
But in a superconductor, you have that same high voltage flowing with zero resistance. Cross-coupling is the biological equivalent.
So it's a state where high-intensity sympathetic input arousal alertness can coexist with deep parasympathetic relaxation.
Exactly.
That sounds completely paradoxical. How can the body be screaming action and relax at the same time?
The text breaks it down anatomically, which helps demystify it. It splits the body into two functional axes.
Okay.
First, you have the dorsal axis, the back of the body.
Yes.
The spine, back of the neck, the posterior cortex of the brain. This is the structure that governs that deep structural relaxation.
So the back is the chill zone.
basically. And then you have the ventral or anterior axis, the
Yeah.
front of the body. Throat, chest, solar plexus, abdomen. This is where we typically process emotion, anxiety, excitement.
Which makes sense. If I get shocking news or I'm on a roller coaster, I feel it in my gut or my chest.
And your immediate reflex is usually to tighten the back to protect the
Yeah.
front. You armor up. The goal of cross-coupling is to decouple those reactions, to keep the dorsal axis, the spine, in a state of absolute parasympathetic relaxation, even while the front axis is processing that high voltage input.
So you're letting the excitement happen in the front, but you're refusing to let it tense up the back.
That is the challenge. It's a state where calming does not eliminate sensory responsiveness. Usually, if you relax too much, you fall asleep, you lose the mood.
And if you get too excited, you get tense.
Right. So this framework asks, can you inhabit that space in between? Can you support the lightning bolt without burning down the tree?
This leads us right into the mechanism for doing that, which the text calls the microcosmic orbit, or Zushin.
Yes.
Now, I have to be the skeptic for a second here. I've heard of this in meditation circles, and it's always presented so mystically. Visualize a golden ball of light moving up your spine. It feels a bit imaginary.
The source would actually agree with you. It's quite critical of what it calls cognitive forcing.
So you're not supposed to try and make it happen.
Yeah, no. It argues that the traditional understanding has been corrupted by people trying to force it with their imagination.
So we aren't supposed to visualize the ball of light.
The text says no. It redefines Zushin not as a visualization exercise, but as a specific neural pathway. It's plumbing, not magic.
Plumbing, I like that.
The claim is that high-intensity neural input naturally wants to follow a path. It travels up the dorsal axis to the brain, specifically the posterior cortex, and then it descends down the anterior axis to the lower abdomen.
Okay, so if that's the natural path, why doesn't it just happen automatically? Why do we need a manual for it?
Because of the resistance we talked about. If the dorsal axis is tense, if your lower back is tight or your neck is locked, the signal hits a wall. It can't circulate.
It gets stuck.
It gets stuck. So it pulls in the path of least resistance, which is usually the genitals or the solar plexus.
And when it pools, the pressure builds up.
Correct. And the body, being smart, wants to relieve that pressure, so it triggers a discharge, a release, which leads to the standard termination of the event.
This is really interesting because the text mentions that people often mistake the symptoms of that blockage for the energy itself. It talks about heat and vibration.
This is a crucial point. We often think, oh, I feel heat in my spine, it's working. This text argues the opposite.
Heat is a sign of resistance.
Exactly. It's friction. A perfectly conducting wire doesn't get hot. If you feel heat or intense vibration, it means the energy is struggling to get through a blockage.
That completely flips the script. The goal isn't to feel more sensation in the spine. The goal is actually a kind of cool, seamless flow.
Yes. The goal is the flow itself, the continuous loop of input traveling up to the brain and back down without getting trapped anywhere.
Okay, so if we aren't pushing the energy with our minds and we're not trying to generate heat, what are we actually doing? I assume there'd be a lot of breathing techniques.
There are, but maybe not in the way you'd expect. When people hear energy work, they think of, vigorous breathing, hyperventilation, breath retention.
Right, pumping the bellows to stoke the fire.
But the source corrects that assumption. It states very clearly, breathing is not a technique to generate altered states here. Its only function is to avoid interfering with the neural flow.
So it's for stabilization, not production.
Stabilization. That's the perfect word. It connects back to that dorsal-ventral split. There's a phrase in the text, dorsal softening without anterior collapse.
I highlighted that. It sounds so simple, but I tried to do it while I was reading, and it's incredibly difficult.
It is. Think about your posture right now. If I tell you to completely relax your back muscles, to just soften the spine, what happens to your chest?
I slump forward, my chest caves in.
Right. And if I tell you to keep your chest open and alert,
I have to engage my back muscles to hold myself up.
that's the dilemma. The technique requires you to find a structural alignment where the front of the body is open and sensitive, but the back muscles are completely offline.
And the breath is what helps with that.
The breath helps stabilize this structure. It's like the scaffolding that holds the building up so the walls can stay soft. You're using the breath to hold the space open, not to push things around.
I see.
The text really emphasizes the natural pause between inhalation and exhalation. It suggests that in that quiet moment, when you aren't grabbing for air, the nervous system is most likely to slip into that cross-coupled state.
Okay, so we have posture, we have quiet breath. Now, the text gives us a map. It lists these neural anchor points. And again, the author warns us, these are not buttons to press.
Think of them more as recognition nodes. They're just specific areas in the body where you can track the flow of sensation.
And the list is pretty specific.
Vary the posterior cranial depth, so the back of the brain, the soft palate or deep throat, the chest, the solar plexus, the lower abdomen, the perineum.
And for females, it mentions internal sensitivity points as well.
Yes. The idea is that your mind uses these points like checkpoints on a highway. You aren't stopping there. You aren't trying to make the solar plexus explode with feeling.
You're just noticing. Ah, the signal is passing through here now.
Now it's moving to the abdomen. You're just giving the mind a job so it doesn't interfere.
And if the mind fixates on the source of the arousal,
It creates a feedback loop that leads to immediate release. By moving your attention through these points, you create a circuit. You're training the brain to recognize the sensation isn't local, it's systemic.
that brings up the role of the skin. The text talks about feather touch stimulation, but not in a, erogenous way.
This connects to the idea of distributed neural input. One of the biggest obstacles here is localization. The sensation gets too intense in one small area, and the system overloads.
Like blowing a fuse because you plug too many things into one outlet.
That's a perfect analogy. So the text suggests using light skin stimulation on the neck, the back, the inner thighs, not to increase pleasure, but to spread the signal out.
You're widening the river.
Exactly. If the brain is receiving input from the whole body, it's easier to keep the system in that circulating mode rather than rushing toward a terminating mode.
This brings us to the philosophical core of this whole thing. We talked biology, breathing, anchors, but it all serves this one big distinction: termination versus circulation.
This is the heart of the matter. The author argues that our conventional model of sexuality is an ending-based processing model.
Which, makes biological sense. We're wired to reproduce. The script is get excited, get more excited, release, game over.
Go to sleep. Right. Localized intensification, climax, termination of the neural input. The signal stops. The energy is spent.
But Fangzhongshu, in this reinterpretation, offers
Non-terminating processing.
non-terminating. Now, I want to be really clear here because I know what some listeners are thinking. Is this just edging? Just holding back?
The source is adamant that it is not. Edging is usually about repression. It's getting close to the cliff and slamming on the brakes. That creates tension.
It's a struggle, you versus your body.
Exactly. This framework is different. It's not about stopping the flow. It's about shifting where the processing happens. Instead of the energy building up and needing to explode out, it recirculates.
So it's not that you're denying the explosion, it's that you're routing the fuel into a different engine.
That's a great way to put it. The impulse moves from that local focus up the spine and into the central nervous system. The text says it's about processing desire as circulation rather than consumption.
And it emphasizes this is gender independent.
A key point, yes. The plumbing might look different, but the neural wiring is the same. For males, the impulse to ejaculate is reprocessed centrally. For females, what is usually episodic stimulation can become a sustained state.
It really redefines what satisfaction even means. In the termination model, satisfaction comes from the release.
The relief of the itch.
Yeah. But in this model, satisfaction comes from the flow itself. The energy feeds the system rather than draining it.
And that brings us right back to the target audience. If you're someone who feels depleted by that termination model, if you feel that emptiness, this offers a way to engage with that energy without paying the exhaustion tax.
But, and this is a big but, and we need to talk about the warnings, because the text is pretty stern about how to approach this.
It is. The biggest warning is against ambition. It says that any attempt to force results or reproduce specific sensations will almost always inhibit the process.
Which is the paradox of the whole thing. If you tell me, hey, you can feel this amazing circulating energy, my instinct is to try really hard to make that happen.
And that effort creates tension, which blocks the dorsal axis, which kills the circulation.
So you have to want it enough to practice, but not enough to try.
The engagement has to be selective and minimal. And frankly, for a lot of people, the sexual practice isn't even step one.
Right.
The source says that for many, just basic regulation of posture and breath is sufficient. If you can't sit with a straight spine and breathe without tension while you're just reading a book, you aren't ready to add high-voltage sexual energy to the system.
You just blow out the circuits.
Exactly. The foundation is universal. The fancy energy work is optional.
So, stepping back from the specifics, what's the big takeaway here? We've looked at a very technical manual for something we usually treat as wild and instinctual.
For me, it's a shift in perspective on what desire actually is. We're so conditioned to think of sensations as commands.
I feel hungry, I must eat. I feel aroused, I must seek release. It's a call to action.
This text invites us to pause and just look at the sensation as neural input. It's just energy in the system, high voltage.
And if you can keep that system open, keep the back soft, the breath steady, that energy doesn't have to leave. It can just power the house.
And that leads to a final thought I'd like to leave you with. We usually assume sexual desire has to end in one of two ways: release or suppression.
It's a binary choice. Let it out or push it down.
But what if termination is just one of many possible modes of processing? What happens to your focus, your creativity, your daily vitality, if that input never actually ends, but simply changes form,
What if the goal isn't to finish the experience?
but to integrate it?
That's a fascinating question to leave hanging. The idea that we might be throwing away a battery every time we use it instead of learning how to recharge it.
Indeed.
Yeah.
It redefines the purpose of the machinery entirely.
Well, you've definitely given me, and I'm sure our listeners, a lot to think about. Whether you're going to try to rewire your nervous system or just sit up a little straighter, there's something here to chew on. Thanks for guiding us through the schematic.
It was a pleasure.
And to everyone listening, thanks for being here. We'll catch you on the next Deep Dive.